Welcome to the Spirit Sessions podcast. I'm your guide, Katie Silcox, bringing you your weekly self-love soundbite. Join us where I'll help you find your true spiritual home, where every single aspect of you is holy ground, holy ground, holy ground, holy ground.
This is Spirit Session Podcast with Katie Silcox. Venga chicos, empezamos.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
Hi everyone, Katie here. This podcast is intended to inspire you, educate you, and most importantly, support you on your journey towards knowing who you really are, that inner self, that inner teacher. I am not a psychologist or a medical doctor and do not offer professional health or medical advice on this podcast. If you are suffering from any kind of psychological or medical issue, please do the right thing and seek help from your qualified health professional. So welcome to another episode of Spirit Sessions. And I'm here with my very beloved friend and mentor and friend of the podcast, former guest of the podcast, Cristal Mortensen, soon to be teacher in the Shakti school. I've invited Cristal back for a number of reasons. And the main one being that I think that there's something that happens when she and I are together that just a part of me just feels really called to share you, Cristal, with the world, because this way that you have of seeing truth is has been just incredibly illuminating for me after 20 years of study. And I suggested this topic that we will dive into today called manifestation, which I'm kind of the ilk. Whenever a word is like everywhere, it's sort of like, oh, maybe we need to really redefine it or have a new word. But I was speaking with Cristal before we started the podcast about how I think for so many of us, especially those of us that grew up in some of the more Judeo-Christian cultures, especially the older generations, that going for our goals, especially as women, right? Like my grandma didn't even have a bank account, and my mom, it was like a big deal for my mom to have a job and earn her own living. And I grew up Southern Baptist, and within that culture, it was very much considered that you were a sinner and you were a hot mess, and your only hope was to find Jesus and to find God, and that your desires were inherently sinful by nature. And then I, like so many people, came to some of these more tantric forms of practice that said that you got to have desire, and that desire wasn't necessarily bad and wrong. And from that, there seemed to be this big push and historical technology around, quote, manifesting. I remember one of my first teachers saying, shortening the distance between wanting and having. And wow, who does not want that, right? And to his credit, he also said, while simultaneously growing the patience and the wisdom to not need it, But as I surf through the rough waters of Instagram, I see a lot of what's being put out there around manifestation. And now in my own sort of maturation and aging process, I'm realizing that we kind of need an update. And I'm certainly doing my own update around my own take on manifestation in general. And so maybe it would help those who are tuning in, like what is manifestation, and maybe what is it through a cultural lens, but what is it actually?
Yeah, I think, on a really fundamental level, we're thinking manifestation, just bringing into being. And one of the things I think is so helpful to keep in mind is just context. Is it's less that manifestation is something that just something we do as like a practice we do in order to work with the things we want. But it's also just what we are. We are a manifestation, and we are as well, we're a bridge between the unmanifest and the manifest. And that's our fundamental nature. So there's a way that working with manifestation can really be a great opening into just experiencing that that is the nature of what we are, and it's happening all the time. And we are a bridge, but we don't usually see ourselves or experience ourselves in that way. We experience ourselves as more small and more limited and struggling and frustrated, or maybe dissatisfied or unhappy or wanting something more. There's that feeling that it's outside of us, or maybe there's something missing. And so it can sometimes, we can sometimes relate to it in a more kind of a material way, and I don't mean materialism, but material as in like on a more gross level of things, and on this like really subtle level. I think manifestation work can become a way to start to actually get in touch with um, manifestation as a process that's happening all the time, and experiencing ourselves as this bridge between the unmanifest and this like limitless field of possibility, um, beyond what we even can conceptualize or kind of wrap our usual brains around, our minds around, and this bridge between that and the this realm of a more kind of manifest realm that we're in. And when we start to experience ourselves in this way, but also experience this as a process that's actually constantly occurring, it really opens it up in a new way, as opposed to we stay sort of solid and how we are in our sort of more fixed sort of maybe personality. And from there, we are wanting to do like a manifestation process to sort of generate from this place. We're actually opening it up to something much larger. And at that point, it's less of something we're doing and it becomes more of just this opening.
Yeah, that's really important that we kind of highlight. I want to kind of come back to that. So there was The Secret, which many people were tuned into, where it's like, your thoughts and beliefs are limiting. Get out of your thoughts and beliefs, and you can have anything that you want, and you can have a Ferrari, or you can have full enlightenment. It's all about your limiting beliefs. And so it was like a really mental apparatus. And then that kind of didn't work for everyone. And then so this then came this like second wave manifestation, which was no, we got it wrong with the secret. It's about generating the feeling that it is already here, that is already done, which perhaps at the end of the day, that is the revelation, but it's top-down approach. It's sort of manifesting or generating the feeling of it actually being here. And I think that too is now starting to come into question, that we're wanting to get out of a certain feeling or a certain mind state. So we generate another one with the hope that we'll kind of catapult ourselves into this next level of quote manifestation, right? And when I've worked with people with manifestation, one of the first things that I notice, and back in my early days of working with Tantra, these formulations were all about I look back at those formulations and think there's some great wisdom in it, but there's a misinterpretation of how to use these ancient methodologies, because as soon as we started to talk about what we wanted, there would be this overwhelming feeling in the room of heaviness and an encouragement to not give in to that lack feeling or that heaviness to like go towards the light of manifestation. So it sort of set up the situation where you're like quietly, secretly feeling bad about the fact that you weren't in this emotional state of joyousness or abundance. And I hear that a lot out in these streets, right? It's like, well, just feel that you're abundant and then everything will be great. And it's a lot more complicated than that, right?
Well, I think, yeah, like this is one thing that, you're really speaking to is there's a reason this is so compelling and there's so much interest because I think on some level, there's such an interest in trying to get a little more connected to what we're talking about, which is a sense of possibility, and how we're usually pretty connected to how much dissatisfaction we have about ourselves and about our situation and about you know even our world in so many ways, and that this is really universal. And so this compassionate understanding towards how there is a struggle that we're going through universally to around this dissatisfaction, and how we approach that, I think, is what we're talking about here. Is how do we approach this feeling of there's something missing, or there's something that I'm hoping for, or there's some dissatisfaction or desire, for more or for something else, or whatnot, that it can help us understand the human condition and what we're kind of up against, that it's so pervasive. um, and so, what you're talking about, where this idea that we're supposed to have a different feeling and we're supposed to feel like turn on the light switch of the feeling of abundance and then poof, it's all here. I think that can create even more feeling of being poverty stricken, because it doesn't really usually work that way. And what we can be doing in that is trying to jump over and get away from and avoid what oftentimes is actually there in a very fundamental way in a lot of us, which is this fundamental wound, which is a sense of ourselves as poverty stricken in terms of how we feel about ourselves, how we feel about our whole experience here, how we feel about what's happening. And it's such a fundamental internal wound that most of us are, kind of walking around with, that we're not necessarily in touch with that as much as we're in touch with what we're hoping for sometimes. And this feeling of poverty, some of us are more, connected to our judgments about ourselves or a sense of not measuring up. But what we're talking about is this getting in touch with the direct experience of the sense of something is missing,
Yes.
or there's something like feeling badly about ourselves and our own internal experience in a way that we're trying to almost like make it better. We want to have a better feeling. We want to have a better experience. But this getting in touch with the feeling of this poverty stricken feeling we have about ourselves inside is actually, to open to that is very courageous and gets us a little bit more in touch with ourselves in this genuine and honest way, where we do have this wound or this brokenheartedness or this feeling of something is amiss, within us. And it's getting in touch with that in this honest, genuine way that then does create an opening. And it's this opening that is the beginning of opening to what's really here. And it's opening to this feeling of appreciation, which happens very spontaneously when we get a little bit closer to ourselves. And this feeling of poverty strickenness, in a way, is because it's so painful, it creates this distance from ourselves. So then we end up in this, there's this gap, there's this distance between us and ourselves. And so then we're trying to manifest from that place. We're trying to be like, from this place where I'm actually not that connected to myself, because that's really painful to feel. That's actually, there's such a wound around feeling like there's something missing inside, or I'm so dissatisfied with myself, or feeling like I'm just not enough or measuring up. It's so painful that we'll kind of want to work from this place of staying a bit distanced from it, because it is so painful to feel within ourselves. And then we want to kind of like create something different from there. And that can be sometimes why we end up feeling like we're just not quite getting it, like it doesn't quite click, because the feeling that we're working from is, again, it's from this place of feeling a sense of poverty strickenness inside. It's very hard for anything else to start to happen from that place. But it's the disconnect from it, which is making it, instead of a transformational opening into something we're trying to get away from and maintain our distance from. So what we're talking about here is getting a little bit closer to ourselves, and a bit through getting a bit closer to these feelings that are there. And at that becomes the opening, that becomes the contact and the opening to what's really here. And that actually is what spontaneously connects us to reality. And reality is, once we're in touch with that, there is a very spontaneous sense of richness and appreciation as we get in touch with ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's important to highlight. Two things for me, really. One is the irony or paradox that the thing that we're running from, especially when we are in these manifestation conversations that are so emphasizing the new world that we're attempting to be in, bypass this really alchemical thing that tends to happen when we move towards the thing that we've been running from. And that paradox being the very thing that enables the second thing that I think is really important that you said, which is the spontaneous arising of appreciation is very different than a mental exercise in gratitude. and not that there's anything wrong with like these mental exercises, they can be very helpful. I'm sure there's a lot of science around that, but the spontaneous arising of wisdom is really different.
Right. And that's the thing, is that's why when we are like wanting to create this feeling, which I think there's so much good intention there in a way, like we want to feel a sense of gratitude because we know that that's a place where we're going to that's going to feel good, or that's going to be healthy. There is really great, we understand that there's so much benefit to these states of gratitude, so that there can be this really in a way a helpful aspiration there, like, okay, I'd like to feel more grateful, but it can be happening from a place
Leaving.
um of leaving, yeah, of leaving, and like we're going to get away from this feeling of something's missing, or a feeling of feeling dissatisfied with ourselves, or ourself, or our life. And so it can be a way we sort of leave ourselves, and leave the connection, and we leave the openness, and to try to mentally convince ourselves of something else. And the truth is, we underneath, we kind of know, it's not really, it doesn't really have that genuine, spontaneous access to what are really fundamental states, like fundamental states of appreciation, which are inherent in us. And this is what we were talking about this the other day, about this is more an uncovering process through getting more in touch. And when we get more in touch, we do go through these layers of, you know, these more painful, states of suffering. And we have to go through that in a way so those can start to become more transparent and be seen a bit more accurately. And then they start to clear away enough that there is this access to what's very fundamental in us, which is the sense of appreciation, for the whole thing, for ourselves, for what's here, experiencing the richness and the sense of possibility. And that becomes more distant to us when we're trying to distance from these more difficult feelings.
So what would you say? Because I know listeners out there, some of our listeners are gonna be like, great, I want to talk all day about my pain and my trauma and my lineage trauma. And a lot of our listeners are like very tuned to the story of our wound. And then you have others, and I think we have our tendencies, but who are like, I've never talked about anything. I had a perfect childhood, just get on the positivity train. And so how does one navigate that really tricky line of not jumping off of the painful experiences without becoming swallowed up and then re-identified with them with the ego? It seems like both of those are not really what you're saying.
Right. And that really is the art of the practice over time, because at first we don't really know the difference.
Yeah.
Right. So
I'm thinking about myself. Yes.
Right. I don't think you're right. It's not like something we can say, okay, this is what you do. It's going to be more of this, exploration and practice where we start to get to know our own mind and begin to open to a more, relationship that becomes a little more honest around being in contact with ourselves and what's here. And again, it's always, there's that, we'll find ourselves going into the, whether it's the story or the amplification, where we're getting a bit more kind of fixated and more generating the repetition of these states, right?
Thought forms. Yeah.
Yep.
Thought.
Or or the avoidance of what we, don't want to feel, or is feeling overwhelming or scary for us, or we go into it and with usually good intention of like, oh, I'm somehow going to resolve it, or I think this is somehow helpful, but it then just becomes more repetition. And we really only learn by experiencing that directly, in ourselves. And through that, then we learn over time how to be open and present with things as they are, and feel when we're sort of heading into that terrain of the reinforcement of the story and the pattern, or where we're trying to kind of get away, from something that we either don't know is there, it's so reflexive, or we're just, it's so overwhelming for us. So it's not so much of like you forcing to be with what's happening, but we become a little more open over time, and we see what happens, and we start to see what the patterns and habits are, and then we get to know ourselves and our mind a bit better. And that's like this whole process of manifestation is that too. So by looking at wherever it is that we're starting from, of I have a desire, like a deep wish for something, and what happens for us around that, what's our relationship to that, to ourselves, to what comes up when we start even getting in touch with what we are wishing for and hoping for, so that we can ask, we can pray, we can ask, we can do our manifestation practices with an open heart, seeing when I do this, what happens inside. Then we get to know the terrain quite a bit better, and we become like less fixated on the making it happen or the outcome, or feeling poverty stricken because we don't have it or it's not happening, or we somehow feel like if we just do it better, then it's all going to come, the thing will happen. So we get to know a lot more of the terrain when we even start working in this way.
So I have a funny story that I want to share with the listeners that you already know about, that I think might give an example of like how to do this tomorrow or today. And that was, I was in Miami. I was in a really nice hotel. I went to this really expensive shop, and this beautiful woman was like, "Oh, you should check out this necklace." And it was this, I mean, I can't even understand like the level of diamond that this thing was. I'd never seen anything so sparkly. And I can't even remember. I don't remember if it was $25,000 or $75,000, but my friend Liz and I, we just started laughing. Like we got the giggles because it was just this number that was so ridiculous, right? And I knew I would never buy this necklace, but I really like loved it and wanted it. I could feel this desire, but at the same time, this like feeling of I'll never have that. And it wasn't even about wanting the diamonds. It was about the strength of how beautiful it was and how much I felt like I would never have it. And when I really could like just let myself feel that poverty feeling, but also the beauty, I started to feel this quality when I let myself feel that inner poverty of my own self. And it, in that moment for me, inside myself felt like this sparkling diamond feeling. And I think you may have even said to me, like, feel the feeling of when you put the diamond on, like what was the feeling? And it was just so much beauty and radiance, and it had, and after, we did this like meditation on that feeling, it had absolutely nothing to do with the necklace. I didn't want the necklace anymore, or I mean, that would be laughable. It was this sense of my own sparkle inside that emerged. And before we started the call, you kind of highlighted this sort of twofold, and correct me if I'm wrong, like way of working with quote manifestation, which is on one hand this real openness and an open-heartedness, and maybe say more. And is that, are you open to what is? Are you open to your desires? Is it opening to all? And at the same time, an opening to the way that all of us have this inner poverty. And I think many people are lucky enough not to have, to look for food or shelter. We're, many of us, living this completely privileged existence where we can actually feel these inner states. So yeah, I just wanted to give the listeners a little example of like how mundane this can be, and how you can use what you think are your desires to go into what might be a deeper desire.
Right. And it's a really good story, because, in that we can start to, experience how the feeling of like that wanting this, like with the necklace, like, oh my gosh, I just really want this
I
necklace.
mean,
And
I
there's
still kind of want it. Okay. It was like a heart-shaped, sparkly diamond. And I mean, even as I'm telling you now, perhaps I'll have to work on it in another session, but I can feel how much I want that in the way that diamonds have been given to chosen women by men. I mean, there's so much laden in the diamond.
well, yeah, but that's, what you get to experience just in being in touch with this experience, right? Like of walking into the shop and seeing the diamond and trying it on and having this feeling. And, what we start to get to is that even it's like this the feeling of like that, the wanting of the diamond, and this like, oh, it's so there's so much pleasure and there's this good feeling. But it's like made of the same fabric is this poverty stricken feeling. So
Loss.
this is why we can't, we can't just stay on one side of this, spectrum or the other. It's not about don't feel poverty stricken, feel the sense of like abundance or brilliance or whatnot, or just feel the poverty strickenness and you're going to just kind of stay there. It's actually that these are really made of the same material. So when we get in touch with one, we inherently are going to be getting in touch with the other. We start getting in touch with the relationship between these two sides. And then what we're able to do is we open beyond that so that the whole thing can start to loosen, the whole thing can start to open, the whole thing can start to become, transform and become malleable. And so we're going beyond this fixation that we get where we want to hold on one side or the other, and we don't want to experience the other side, or we are attached to one side, or we think this is all I have and I don't have this other feeling. But when we start to see they're actually made of the same material, it becomes less like are less attached to having to avoid the poverty stricken feeling or the feeling of not having something or wishing for something, or the sense of this desire, and how much we are hoping or wishing for something for ourselves. But what it does is it starts to open up the terrain beyond the polarization of like having and not having, or like abundance, poverty, all these things, but it's any polarization, like all of these, like the two sides, these pairs that we can get in touch with here in this realm. And we start to actually experience they are made of the same material, they're not so different. And then it allows us to really open up. And then it becomes less about how do I stay on one
Right.
side? How do I get on this side of the abundance? Let me stay there because I want to get away from this feeling of poverty because I don't like that. You can't. They are just inherent in each other. So once we start seeing that, the whole thing starts to loosen and the whole thing starts to open up. And that's what we were really, we were chatting a little bit about before, about this is in a way the sort of the bigger picture of things, where it's like where we don't get trapped on one side or the other, but we start to open beyond into the bigger sense of reality that includes all of it. And then there's less of this like anxiety and neurosis about avoidance of what we're feeling here.
Mm. Yeah, there seems to be in pop spiritual culture this idea that if we are just have our shit together enough, we'll be able to manifest all the good side. It's so skewed and it's so oppositional to what I've studied in all these great mystical teachings. The distillation of these teachings is that it's not really meant to be this paradise down here. It's meant to be more like University of the Soul. And how many of us have had some of the most opening moments of our lives when it was absolutely not what we like collaged on our vision board, and yet that tends, if we stay open, to be the very thing that can awaken us into more insight and more wisdom. And I've noticed what's happening for me now. you and I were joking about making a t-shirt that says recovering manifester, because it's not that I don't want things. That's for sure. I definitely want things, but it's becoming less and less. I used to do a lot of like technological work around this, like tantric technology of manifestation. Like if you reduce your karma enough and you reduce your negative thinking enough and you just, move into your Shakti and your energy and your positivity enough, then you kind of tip the scales in the favor of you being this like agent of creation, which I think we have a role as agents, but more and more now, I feel like I'm less interested in that sort of egoic manifestation and more in getting a little bit more like I don't know what might be good for me, or do you know what I mean, like getting more open to that which will liberate my heart, rather than, because so much of the things that I have been even in a hot pursuit of manifestation have been coming from a blind spot that wanted validation, whether that be from men or writing books, or not to say that it was only that, but I'm seeing now the deeper motivation may have been unconscious in terms of manifestation. And that's where things get really tricky, because how many people have gotten what they wanted only to then realize, whoa, this was coming from a place of lack or running.
Yeah. And I think what you're talking about there is really key too, is that, when you talk about these more, maybe a little more mechanical, like way of approaching manifesting, right? Like you can feel in that how there can really be this strong sense of there's me, and I'm still this like solid me. That's usually more our personality and more of our habits and more of our sort of familiar way of experiencing ourselves that feels pretty solid, right? It's like, here I am, I'm Katie, and this is who I am, and this is what I
I'm manifesting
want.
teen Bernadoodles.
Yeah, yeah, right. Which that's happening, but
Yeah, good job. You're winning.
But and then there's this like the energy is sort of separate, or this idea of like kind of bringing things into being or working with energy is something that's more other to us, and but we stay intact as who we are. And so what that can do over time, right, is this is just this reinforcement of this more kind of more rigid and familiar way of being, but also of experiencing ourselves and experiencing our world. So perceptually, there's going to be a lot more, it's coming from this more kind of limited way of perceiving ourselves in reality. So, and it always is going to feel like something we're doing and something that's more other to us. And so we're talking about this shift or this, and it's not that that's wrong or bad. It's usually where we're starting from, because that's how we experience ourselves.
Yeah.
And it just feels like how things are.
And personal willpower for some people
Yeah.
initially can be really important to cultivate, right? Like discipline and personal will.
Well, and that's, where we're going to start, is that's the way we perceive ourselves in reality is where we're starting from. So what happens here is, if we start to approach manifestation more and more by getting in touch with ourselves and starting to loosen and relax these more, kind of see the more sort of structured and rigid ways that we experience ourselves and experience reality, which is usually the thing we're trying to get out of anyway. A lot of times our manifestation hopes are because we want to become liberated from what we feel as confining or restrictive, or something we might feel sort of trapped in. And we're wanting this different experience. We're wanting something, we want to go beyond, right? And then, but of course, we're going to approach it from where we're at, which is going to start out as the way we experience ourselves, which is more solid, we're solid and we're going to work with energy to bring in this other thing that we're hoping for. And energy is something a bit foreign, right? So what we're talking about is starting from there is always where we're most likely going to be, because that's how what we're able to perceive. But through working with this, starting to open, what we're working with is perception beginning to become more and more subtle, right? And we start to perceive ourselves and our world from a more and more subtle place. And this is what allows us to go from these more fixed ways of feeling and experiencing ourselves and feeling and experiencing and perceiving our world. And as that starts to loosen and that starts to open, then what occurs is that we start to experience reality more accurately, which is one of this openness and this limitless possibility and malleability, where things actually are always coming into being. And so then we start to be able to experience this bridge that we were talking about in the beginning, which is we can feel how we are this bridge or this conduit between the unmanifest, and we become the conduit through which the unmanifest can come in and become manifest. And then we can feel how to go back and forth between the unmanifest and the manifest inside in a very direct way, not necessarily because we're doing it, which we can do. That's the thing you can do. But in a deeper level, what can free us even more completely is we actually can experience the process of the unmanifest coming into being, into manifestation. And once we find ourselves at the Genesis place where we actually just experience it happening, everything starts to open up, and it becomes less about staying solid and making better things happen. And it becomes about experiencing what's really here and how reality really is, which is this constant genesis of the unmanifest into the manifest. And at that point, we can really open, and we could even pause the whole thing, and we could hold open into this place of limitless possibility that we are directly in touch with. Instead of the polarization, like we talked about earlier, this is in a way, one of these ultimate polarizations between unmanifest and manifest. And what we don't realize, we're actually the bridge between the two, which starts to dissolve the polarization between the two.
Yeah, I mean, that's the definition of yoga, right? The yoga is hatha, the sun and the moon, the aligning of the duality, bringing the polarization into the center. I mean, just for those who are listening, you said something in the beginning. By the way, guys, this is why we've invited Cristal in for an 8-week course, because this is, this is some deep stuff that you're speaking of, and practically, I think for me, step one has been, and it's challenging. You said it sort of like we have to get in touch with who we are. And I think so many of us are deluded into thinking that we are our thoughts, or we are our personalities, or we are our feelings. And energy is being able to sense subtle energy as at least a part of our story of who we are, if not, the reality of who we are, as opposed to the personality or the ego or the thoughts or whatever we want to call it, has been huge for me. And so it's almost like we have to start there. And if we're starting from the mental body, we're not able to perceive what you just called this sort of genesis point, this birthing place of all manifest reality. So if someone out there listening is like, okay, but how do I sit down and do this, Crystal? Like, how can I begin tonight to maybe practice some of this? You should join Crystal's 8-week course. I mean, that's why we've invited you, is to give people a lot more time and practice. But let's say for someone out there listening that really wants to try this, how can they start?
Well, I mean, there's so many, there's a many practices that folks can do. But I think what we're talking about here is this attitude towards, or this approach towards, of starting to get in touch with, a little more of the direct experience, a little more of the energy, right? And it's not about not being in your thoughts or not being in your personality, because again, that's going to just be pretty
That's
much happening.
dividing us again.
That's dividing us again. And what we're starting to do is just start to experience, wherever we are at, actually does give us a lot of sense of this openness. Right. So if we were looking at, a way to even start with a little something together today, as just a jumping off point of a practice, but from this, in a way, like as best as we can, with this aspiration to, for this to become an opening, and for this to become a way to become a little more in contact with ourselves and with energy, and to start to relax a little more and a little more into what's here. um, why don't we do a little practice together?
Yeah, I would love that. I'm just thinking of like, have a friend that really, really wants to have a baby, and that would be something she want to manifest, or another person that might want to manifest their job, a job or a partner, these health, like these kind of quintessential things that humans want. Um, like, yeah, like how would we enter into a practice around that? That would be amazing to do a practice together.
Hmm. Well, I think, just in general, for folks to, something to start to even just work with on their own. We can do a practice together here today, but something just so simple that anybody can do is to, just kind of take a little time out and sit, somewhat quietly, with posture that feels, upright and open, but, also relaxed. Um, and to kind of drop in and down, as we've done before. We've taught before with the waterfall practice, as though, it's like the direction of a waterfall coming from above and coming kind of down through the body, down through the legs, and out through the feet, as a way to start to kind of move down to, um, our connection to the earth, including all of us. It's a way to just get started with connecting to the sense of us being kind of all the way in and down, and noticing that, the earth is there under us, and it's got this, magnetic pull. So there's a pull there. Just starting there, noticing what that's like to be in touch with something, um, that's bigger than you. That can support us in feeling a little more connected to ourselves and a sense of our own kind of orientation. And then from there, bringing the attention without losing this downward connection and sense of groundedness and sense of the earth, including attention into the center of the heart. As almost your second orientation point here, without losing the first. And then from the center of the heart, just opening as best as you can in whatever way you can to open to the field of the heart, which goes, beyond the physical body, and particularly noticing the field of the heart, behind the body. It can go far, far back. And then from here, just allowing an aspiration that you have for yourself, for your life, or for someone else to come into the heart and to connect with. And just really allowing yourself to be in a place of patience and openness to allow the aspiration to emerge from within and from within this larger field that you're in contact with, as though you're receiving it more than necessarily just thinking it, even though it could come from thought, that's fine. But a sense of receptivity to an aspiration that's meaningful to you. And just allowing this time for this aspiration to arise, to possibly develop, possibly refine. It could take a little time for it to go through a few iterations to clarify. And if you feel like you're getting a little caught in thoughts or any worry or anxiety or associations or past or future thinking, that's fine. None of that's a problem. But just allow your mind to just notice that and just relax and open back up to this field. And just opening to the receptivity for this aspiration to emerge into this space. If it feels helpful, you can allow a container to emerge and to form, which will be unique and personal to you. It could be anything from a clay pot or bowl to a crystal chalice to a huge crater in the earth. It's whatever way it emerges and forms for you. And allow that to be kind of in the front, right? So you've got this open field to the earth below. You've got this open field of the heart that can go all the way back behind you. And then in front, you have this container forming. You can allow this aspiration to either be placed within this container, or you can allow the aspiration to emerge from within this container. It's whatever feels right to you, whatever appears. And just giving this all the time. And as we give this all the time it needs, we are allowing ourselves to be in this place of patience and openness, of waiting and of receptivity, in this place of possibility without agenda, being as open-hearted as we can to what may come. And as we're doing this, we're allowing energy to begin to collect within this container, allowing energy to begin to build within this container. And we're supporting that with our presence and our openness and our invitation. And just taking all the time with this, and you'll feel that usually there's going to be, a point where you start to get a feeling of this being complete in some way in this moment. And as you sense that for yourself, in whatever way that you're aware of the sense of that, there's this sense of this collection of energy has has come to like a completion for now. And just gently, coming back into this moment, into this space that you're in. And just see how you're feeling and see what you're noticing, what your state is like, what your body feels like, how the world feels to you.
So that was it.
Do you want to share, Kitty? Do you want to share what
Oh,
anything
I
about what you're experiencing?
well, one, I'm experiencing a lot of gratitude for you and that practice, and like you and I are doing a podcast right now, but we're also sitting on Zoom together, just the two of us. And like, I think so many listeners will resonate with this, just the way that our culture is so one of grind and hustle and do. And even when I studied the lineage of Tantra, there's such an emphasis on manifestation. It's very go out and get it. You can do it. Willpower, shoot your arrow of fire into the universe and grow your phallic tower, and this was like, and of course we don't have to call it because it's within all of us, but it is the feminine, what you just guided me and soon the listeners through, which is this open container. You said the word. And it's just like the whole nervous system relaxes. And there's this feeling of waiting because we're worth it, because whatever is generating does have a need for time. And thank you. That was very practical, but also I think elucidates the way that it's challenging to talk about these things, because you did 10 minutes and then it's like, oh, okay, fundamental energy, but you're playing an active role in going down and feeling the heart expand and all of these things. And what also I noticed, it was really beautiful, is that I could also, as I was seeing that container fill, for me, it's like drops of water and getting full, more and more full, the less I was concerned. I mean, this isn't like I'm not completely selfish, don't worry, but like I started to be able to see good things for my family and for my friend. I'm thinking of you, Liz and Mare, and like Cristal, I saw your house and I saw things for others. And I think that is the first time that's ever happened to me in a manifestation, right? We're always thinking of our own selfish desires. And that was really brought in way more energy to the bowl.
And I think that's, what we're experiencing here with this. It's like creating this open space in us, and this open space, like we did it, with this container as well, where it's like for something to happen, there needs to be enough energy. Enough energy needs to build for transformation, for something to occur, for something to move forward. And so, especially when we're in times in our life where we're maybe feeling like we're not quite, we're sort of like hoping for, or we're maybe feeling a developmental shift, or we're wishing for a developmental shift. I think this speaks to that we can get hard on ourselves if it's not happening, or we can feel diminished, or that we're somehow failing, or we're not measuring up, or maybe we just, it's not going to happen for us. Like we're going to be stuck forever, or we're going to be in our feeling of poverty forever, or our situation is going to feel just rigid forever, and repetition and repetition, all the things that happen where that's how we get stuck. And that's what most of us, that's what we're experiencing. And so it's not about like, okay, you've got to be this, manifestation goddess and just be able to feel like everything's changing and being wonderful all the time. It's really not that. It's actually experiencing that, how we feel like something is stuck for us. Something's not quite moving forward. And what we're doing here is we're just allowing this openness and this aspiration. We're giving a space within which the energy around this and around our own process can begin to collect and build, where then there's enough, things start to move forward.
Well, and I'm thinking microcosm, macrocosm. So space and energy. That is literally what happens when we have a womb and life force, right? It's like even on a physical level of how a baby comes into being, a manifestation of being, it requires the womb, which is the container, which is open and empty, and but also simultaneously nutritive and energizing through the sperm and the egg. I mean, it's all there from that base level to what you and I are speaking of now, where, I mean, I can speak personally and maybe it'll help the listeners, but if I'm caught in my poor me story, which is what I've been working through lately, and or victim story, or I'm better than everyone, or I'm worse than stories, all these constrictions. Or another story which comes up a lot for people is that you mentioned too, is it'll always be this way, this feeling of being stuck. The thinking mind is also a way of kind of going into that. And it's not that that's bad, but it feels the opposite of spaciousness. And I'm trying to story and think my way into the manifestation, when literally without that spaciousness, nothing energetically can actually start to be held. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, and it's interesting that you're mentioning space, and we had talked about this before. We hadn't really touched on this today, but just as a little, we can talk about it just a little bit. Is the etheric, right? So the etheric realm and the etheric body, which is connected to the throat chakra, is the access point, is the portal to the etheric, and the element of that is space. And that's actually where, when we're, in terms of, manifestation coming through the etheric, it's like all the perfect forms of everything exist in this etheric realm, and our perfect kind of template for our body is our etheric template. And connecting with the etheric, which is space, allows us to connect with the etheric realm and start to feel a sense of what this is like. We feel the sense of space. We also feel and experience directly the energetics through which what's possible comes into being. So having this sense of directly experiencing space is an opening to manifestation, even in more ways than we even realize.
Yeah, so it's as easy as that, everyone. Now, okay,
Yeah,
let my marketeer brain is like, I gotta. So guys, I mean, this is just a taste of Cristal Mortensen. That's why we've invited you for 8 weeks. I am selfishly so excited about. Oh, Jess is barking. She's excited. And why? So we're talking about manifestation in this podcast, but what I'm coming to the conclusion of is we're actually talking about energy. And without a conversation on energy, it's like that's step one, is get in touch with fundamental life force.
Well, and that's, when we think about what we're doing, is we are opening our perception beyond these fixed, limited ways we're used to experiencing ourselves and the world, right? As solid and fixed, and through this sort of more rational part of the mind, right? So what we're doing is we are in our process of starting to open to and develop a relationship to energy, is about starting to open up our perception a bit more to the subtle. And as we open to the subtle and the energetic realm, which is here all the time, it's in us, it's everything, it's underneath everything that's solid. So we're learning to go from this more the gross to the subtle, and the more fixed to the more malleable and open. And it's our contact and perception with that, which is what allows us to start to actually perceive what we're describing, which is the way, it's like energy is coming into being. Perceive this place that we're describing, where we can actually experience very directly the unmanifest into the manifest, and this whole process that we're starting to be able to get in touch with, which is not something foreign. Again, it's what we are. It's us. it is us. It's not exotic. It's not separate. It's not something that we are doing. It's something we're starting to become in contact with. And once we start being in contact with it, we directly experience this process of coming into being. From there, we go from this what we usually experience is, things being more stuck and more limited, and the way things repeat, and we feel a bit stuck, which we all do, and that's not a problem. We start to experience that starting to loosen and open, and we start getting a bit more contact with reality, and reality actually is very open, very fresh, very vast, and quite limitless. And so it's perception that allows us to start to experience that more directly through our experience with energy. So energy is here all the time, and it gives us this wonderful opportunity to become in touch with exactly what we're describing.
So Crystal, when we're doing that practice, because everyone I know is going to love that, I'm going to use that as well. And you walked us through the earth, the grounding, and you walked us to that back body of the heart, opening, receiving, containing, and then invoking in a way the desire, the longing. In that moment, I could feel.
Well, actually, we said aspiration, which is
aspiration.
it's a little different than longing.
So
Not that it's
help
not.
me with that. Help me work with that, because okay, again, let's say we're talking about someone in our life that really wants to have a baby. How do you place that aspiration? Or do we have to dig deeper than, oh, I want a boyfriend, or I want a baby, or I want a new job? Do we have to kind of get into the energy of the thing?
Not, I don't know if that's necessarily it, but it is helpful to, if we think of like longing and desire, that can be very emotionally laden for us.
Yes, that's right.
And that can be very much tied and associated with our history and our past, and more of like our personality, or what we think of as our personality, which tends to be it can be a bit more fixed, and our ways of seeing the world. So there's a way that something that has a higher emotional kind of charge to it, there's just naturally going to be more reactivity, more anxiety, more attachment. It's harder to see clearly. So when we think of aspiration, it's almost like we're sort of opening beyond the way we get really caught and emotionally stirred up about the things we want or hope for, yeah, or the things we don't want.
So
and we let that settle. So we're letting, as we sit in that space where we're really getting, the first part we did is get grounded. That starts to allow some of this reactivity to start to kind of settle down a little more. It's like it settles us a little bit more out of that more turbulent space where we're like, I have to have this thing. I really want this thing. I need this, or all the things that can happen for us about what we are hoping for, right? Which is very natural. That's just part of what happens. But there's that more reactive, attached aspect to it that I think we're more in touch with when we're approaching it from a place of longing and desire. There's just a lot more. So what we're doing with aspiration
so how do you still the aspiration?
Well, I think, in the practice that we did, it's kind of baked into that, because we worked with getting grounded first, which is settling for the nervous system. It helps the mind to start to kind of settle a bit more. And then we open to the field of the heart. And, the heart is it's a bridge between our kind of upper realms, yeah, and our more like kind of human realms, yeah, like body and emotion and thought. So if we think of body, emotion, thought as more of those lower chakras, and it's not lower like worse, and it's not like upper is better. It's just this, that's more of this realm. right? And then we've got our upper centers, which are more like the etheric and the celestial, right? And, our third eye and our intuition, where we're opening to what's beyond what's here in this material realm.
Ah, I just
So,
got it.
right. So the
Got it.
heart is the transition between those and the bridge between those.
Ah.
So it's not like either or. We're like, oh, it's get
So
rid
when
of
you're in the
those.
aspirational, when you're in the heart realm,
Yeah.
essentially what you're doing is you're saying to those quote lower but not bad realms, like, come on up, and then inviting in the limitless. So the aspiration, it might be different than your like neurotic desires.
Well, and I think it's less of asking like those to come on up, but
Yeah.
everything has its place.
Yeah.
Like everything is in alignment. So from the heart, because the heart is like the transition between the two, it's the portal, it's the bridge between the two. It almost is this perfect sort of combination of all this limitless possibility and then this like manifest realm, which, if we think of the, first chakra as the body, right? And the second chakra is emotion, and the third as more mental, right? Those are a little younger centers. Those can tend to be a little more associated with our journey in this lifetime. And what we think of a lot of times as more who we are and more like our personality and our fears and our like younger emotions that have more to do with like survival and about me and am I going to be okay, and or our the mental realm, which on its own is somewhat insular. Like it doesn't really have a lot of new information. It's more of like what we already know. So when we connect to the heart, we're really connecting with the bridge between like this more open, expanded, larger sort of perceptual access that we have to the bigger picture of things, right? Where we have bigger sense of perspective, which is super helpful when we're connecting with what our aspiration is. When we're working from the heart, or we have access to the heart, it's not going to just have our anxiety to it. It's not just going to have the things we want that have to do with maybe our fears about ourselves and our life, or our insecurities, or our
Even
mental patterns.
and even a limited sense of this being the only life,
Yeah,
like,
and this
gotta
being
get it
all
all
there is.
done. I gotta have all the babies and all the Bernedoodles and all the boyfriends because this is it.
Right. YOLO, right? Yeah. So, which is not to, and not to say, that's, you should think differently about it or anything. It has to do with, what's relevant and meaningful to you, but that we're able to have this larger perspective. So when we, like in the practice we did, connecting with getting grounded and then connecting with the larger field of the heart in its infinite realm, where we have access to more than just our own fears, insecurities, or worries, or sadnesses, or disappointments, and all the things that has kind of happened here for us. It's We're not bypassing those, we're acknowledging those, as well as opening to a larger viewpoint and a larger perspective, so that when we are then connected to the field of the heart in this grounded way, and we ask for that emergence of the aspiration,
So it's
we're
almost, we wait for the emergence of the aspiration rather than me implanting in the desire that I've been speaking of for 80 years or whatever.
yeah, exactly. And and it's okay to start from that place.
That's a
It's not
big
like, it is a big difference, but it's also not like, don't do that, that's wrong. It's like, we start wherever we're at, because
Okay.
sometimes we just go, we've got something that's so like strong in our mind. We're like, oh my God, I just want that, want a relationship, or I want that car or house, or I want this amount of money, or I want this job, or I want this, whatever it is, career. It could be just like so strong in our mind. And so the hope in this practice is that we settle enough
Mhm.
and we're quiet enough that that could be there. But remember, we gave time in the practice. So we gave time for it to actually iterate, right? Not necessarily just be like the first thing, and then we say we're just sticking to that because that's what we know. And it could be just this is the thing, and it's really clear, and we like put that in. But as we sit quietly in this receptive, open space in the heart, we're actually allowing the the aspiration or the prayer or the wish, whatever you want to call that, to refine itself and distill itself a little more and a little more. And a lot with manifestation too is about refining our questions,
Mhm.
right? As you know, I'm buying this house that is, I haven't really talked much about it, but the the day before this whole process sort of really kind of got underway about this house coming into my life and um, coming into being, I was in this process of refining the question because I had questions. When you have something you are hoping for or um, wishing for in your life, part of it is distilling what are the questions, and usually there's multiple questions, and then we distill them down into like three main questions. So what we're doing in that process is we're refining what our questions are about this thing we're asking for or hoping for or wishing for or praying for. And the day before this all started to roll, I was in that process and I realized one of my questions was about timing. Like, what is the time? When is the right time? And I got a really clear answer, was now. And that proved to be, it just opened the door and this process just got underway. And that experience of holding, like allowing the question to distill into actually, and that took a while for me because there was a lot of questions I had, or there was a lot of thoughts I had about it. And I had been working with this for a while in terms of allowing this to really kind of distill. And it's almost like I just had gotten to the most distilled question that I had about it, that when I was in my thoughts about it, that might come up more as like, I'm not sure, or maybe some worry, or some, I'm not sure about this. But that's really different than getting to that there was a question there, which was, what's the right timing? And once the question formed, it's like the whole thing unraveled and the whole thing came into being very quickly. So, and that's not to say I sat down one day and thought, oh, well, I think I'd like to have a house, and ask the question and poof, not that that can't happen that way. But there was this refinement process that had gone on around the layers for me that were associated with wanting a home. And as I went through the different layers of what that like brought up for me, what my worries were, or what my beliefs were, or what my feelings or emotions were. And over time, that got to distill out more and more. And the question became more and more distilled as the aspiration became more and more distilled. And there was less and less charge and less um, reactivity, or less and less of those old thoughts, beliefs, family patterns, all the things that were all kind of interwoven within within this aspiration that I had, or prayer that I had, and working with all of those allowed the whole thing to distill. Um, and so I think that's a lot of what we're doing here is we're creating this space and this openness to work with what comes up for us around our hopes for ourselves or our hopes for our life or for other people, and for, you know, what we're wishing for, what we're praying for, and allowing it to just keep distilling and keep distilling and keep distilling. So a lot starts to untangle off of it, and the energy for it can collect and can build so it can move forward. And in conjunction with that, allowing the all of it to distill, like what we hope for can distill into a more clear form. What we are questions about, how do we move, what do we do about it, or how do we move forward in that direction, those questions get to also distill, but from this place we're talking about, not just from our rational mind questions, but they can emerge into the space. And then through this process of being open and receptive and patient and waiting and allowing the energy to begin to form, that in and of itself is transformative and allows us to become more and more open, more and more perceptive. And to me, that's the most important part of this.
Right.
Is not
Way
so
more than
much like, then I got the house, or
Yeah.
then I got the thing. Not to discount that. It's really great and wonderful when
Right.
these things that can really support us come into our lives. And that is not to be discounted. However, the process of going through exploring in this way and the way it transforms us and allows us to become more and more open, to me, that is the bigger picture.
Yeah. Way more important than getting the object of the longing is the experience of that intimacy and the distillation and the wisdom that comes from sitting with the layers of distillation.
Mhm.
So I think anyone that's made it through this 90-minute podcast on manifestation, which is just a taste and a beginning, will understand why I wanted to like have a really long form experience with you in the Shakti school, and why learning how to work with our energy is primary. And you're coming to Shakti school August 20th for 8 weeks, where we're going to get to have you for several hours each week, each Sunday. Cristal Sundays, we're going to call it. It's Ayurveda Tuesday and Wednesday and Cristal Sundays. Maybe a good place. I'm just so grateful for that meditation and that experience, but maybe just to close, Cristal, let's distill it all down. If there was a billboard that you could put up on the side of the highway where when people drove by, it just said one line, what would it say?
Stay open.
I knew you were going to say that. I literally, as you were sitting there, I was drawing the tattoo on my arm, stay open. Thank you, Cristal, for being who you are and for your practice. And we're all going to send energy to your house. I know you're in the middle of a move right now, so thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to be on Spirit Sessions. And we look forward to welcoming you into the classroom, and everyone should sign up, not just because I think that this is the best course that is probably we're going to have, but because I think it really, really can be helpful for people to have a practical way of working with their energy. So thank you so much.
You're so welcome. It's always a pleasure.
Stay
Looking
up.
forward to the class. Definitely looking forward to it. I think we're going to have a really good time together, and yeah, and we're all going to grow.
Yeah, that's a good aspiration. All right, everyone, there you have it. How does
See you
it happen?
soon.
Best. We'll see you. We hope to see you all in August. And thanks again, Cristal. Much love. A big special thanks to Kevin Carlisle of Goodbye Gemini, who wrote this beautiful podcast music, and to DJ Juan Pablo Jimenez in southern Spain for mixing it and making it magic.